Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have the roll call for the council, please?
Council members Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here.
And we need
And for the Housing Authority.
authority members Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Barazian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here.
May we have your report,
The
please?
agenda for the May 25th, 2010 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, May 20th, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before you today is presentation, Director of Community Services and Parks regarding CDBG, SHP, and WIA programs and proposed budget for fiscal year 2010-2011.
Thank you. Who are we going to?
We're going to go to Jess Duran, Assistant
Mr.
Director.
Duran. Is this a
The departments have changed, but the faces are the same.
You know, I still can't get the departments straight.
You have to work at it. You have to work at it. A little harder. A little fewer hamburgers and...
Thank you, Mr. Starbird, Mayor Najarian, members of the City Council, Chairman Quintero, members of the Housing Authority of the City of Glendale. We are before you today to present our 2010 budget with regard to community development, homeless, and workforce programs. And obviously, this is a very high level of summary, and so we hope to get through it rather quickly. The topics are the CDBG program. CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grant. The SHP program, which stands for Supportive Housing Program, which is part of our homeless strategy. And WIA, which stands for Workforce Investment Act program, which is part of our employment training strategy in the City of Glendale. We will talk about service levels in terms of what this community gets for its funding and the budget. And we'll talk about challenges and future outlook and any questions that the council or authority may have. With regard to CDBG, CDBG is the most prominent of the programs. Overall, as you can see at the bottom, the total increase is $187,000 over the current year, which represents a 5% increase, which is a general increase across the board that HUD has provided to the CDBG program. With regard to salaries and benefits, this line item includes the code enforcement salary and benefits. The code enforcement program is a $420,000 program, and most of that is in salaries and benefits. Salaries and benefits line item also includes any construction management staff that's charged to CDBG-funded capital improvement projects. And it also includes staff, mainly hourly, that are operating city-sponsored social service programs that are funded with CDBG, such as the PAL program, Bookmobile, Senior Care, and Youth and Outreach program, and Camp Rosie. The increase, the increase in salaries and benefits is mainly due to an increase in an estimate of construction project management staff related to the Pacific Park and Maryland Mini Park projects, which will be coming online next year, in addition to finishing up the East Garfield project. And it also accounts for more city staff being charged to the public social service programs operated by the city departments. We've also redistributed 20% of an administrative analyst's salary from projects to administration, and we've allowed for about $20,000 for hourly wages in order to hire some help to prepare our 5-year fair housing plan, which will be due next year. So that accounts for the $136,000 increase. In terms of M&O, the M&O includes our annual Section 108 loan payment, which, as you know, is $250,000. What happened last year is, well, in 08-09, we actually made 2.5 payments on our Section 108 loan in order to meet our expenditure rate. So in the current year, we only had half of a payment, and so next year in 10-11, we have a full payment, and so that accounts for the $126,000 increase under M&O. Then direct assistance is the allocations that go directly to the nonprofit organizations, both for social services and for capital improvement projects. And then capital projects, in this case, is mainly the park, the allocation for the park project, minus construction management staff, which would be accounted for under salaries and benefits. So that's the CDBG program proposed for fiscal year 10-11. In terms of service levels, we will, this amounts to 42 CDBG, ESG, and SHP projects, which require planning, contract administration, monitoring, and financial management. It includes 4 to 5 CDBG-funded city capital improvement projects at any given time, which also include construction management and compliance administration. And we will be able to serve about 5,000 unduplicated persons receiving direct assistance from the nonprofits and city departments that are funded as a result of the CDBG program. In terms of challenges and future outlook, a challenge that we always have is fluctuating budgets and the unpredictability of what's going to take place at the federal level in terms of whether more or less funding will be available for the CDBG program. Of course, the impact of the 2010 census will affect our entitlement as to whether it remains relatively the same or we experience an increase or a decrease. Increased regulatory requirements. HUD is becoming stricter in terms of eligibility requirements, which are then transferred onto our nonprofit organizations. And speaking of nonprofits, financial and management capacity of nonprofits is always a challenge and will continue to be a challenge, especially with the economic downturn. In terms of the supportive housing program, again, this is the $2.2 million grant that we get from HUD for homeless programs and to implement our continuum of care strategy. We are, under salaries and benefits, we are proposing $86,000, which represents a $153,000 decrease. And the reason for that significant decrease is because last year we started the year where we had taken over the Hamilton Court Transitional Housing Program because the YWCA had withdrawn from operating that program. So we had to hire 3 employees that became city employees. And so the $239,000 last year accounted for their salary. We've since then transitioned that project over to Door of Hope, who now operates Hamilton Court, and so we don't need the same salaries and benefits that we had last year, which is the current year. So we're only proposing $86,000, which is to pay for 1 FTE under SHP. In terms of M&O, again, that's direct assistance. These are the funds that go to the nonprofit organizations and service providers that actually operate the programs under the homeless continuum of care. The other thing I'd like to say is, while this is a $2.2 million program, which requires a lot of administrative oversight and monitoring and financial management and working closely with the nonprofits, for the most part, the CDBG program administration has to support SHP administration, and so I just wanted to make that point. Next slide. In terms of service levels for SHP, between 800 and 1,000 persons will receive Access Center case management, counseling, and referral. 300 will receive emergency housing at Path and at Sunrise Village. 56 will receive permanent housing. 75 will receive transitional housing. 365 will receive homeless prevention case management and financial assistance services provided by Catholic Charities.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Duran, are those duplicated or non-duplicated?
These are unduplicated numbers. Thank you, Mr. Starbird. In terms of challenges and future outlook, the main thing to know about the SHP program is that there is new federal legislation which will change the way we operate homeless programs beginning next year. There's a new federal consolidation of the 3 homeless programs, SHP, ESG, and Shelter Plus Care, which is called the, you know how HUD loves acronyms. is called the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition Housing Act of 2009, or commonly referred to as the HERTH Act.
Coincidence.
What this will do, for the most part, it will expand the definition of homeless, which means that we will be able to assist more persons. Right now, the definition is very strict, and you literally have to be on the street for at least 24 hours before you can walk into PATH, for example, to take advantage of homeless services. This will allow us to expand that definition, so I believe persons with documentation that they are on the verge of becoming evicted, for example, would also be eligible for homeless services. It will provide funding for administration, which, as I mentioned earlier, we currently don't get, and so we have to tap into CDBG and rely on CDBG to provide administration for our homeless strategies. It will provide more funding for permanent housing, which is a huge gap across the country right now in terms of what to do with persons once they've received all the case management that they can, and they're ready to graduate from transitional housing. They need permanent housing, and so this act will focus more on permanent housing. And housing first, which I call is changing our paradigm. We've been trained for the last 10 years to get homeless persons into case management and make them demonstrate that they're ready to make the changes they need to make and that they're on their way to addressing their issues. And then the reward is transitional and permanent housing. HUD is asking us to change that paradigm, and HUD is saying that they want us to work with the chronic homeless, get them off the streets, get them into housing, stabilize their environment, and then backfill with the case management and the follow-up. So that's all going to be part of the HERTH Act. And what that's going to do is it's going to force us to continue to concentrate on chronic homeless, to concentrate on more street outreach, and I included it's going to be tough on the landlords because these persons won't be as ready or equipped to be able to live in a unit without a lot of monitoring and supervision from homeless staff. So we're going to have to rely on the good graces of our landlord community to help us in this program with this new strategy. And another major challenge project that we're going to be spending a lot of staff time on in the coming year is the PATH project. As you all know, PATH has embarked on a very ambitious project to acquire and rehabilitate a new access center and emergency shelter, in addition to them stepping up and buying buildings to provide their own permanent housing. And so that's going to be a major project for us in the upcoming year. In terms of the Workforce Investment Act program, what we did under salaries and benefits, well, you can see at the bottom, basically it's virtually the same budget as the current year. Under salaries and benefits, what we did do was we eliminated 3 salaried positions, which were on the books, but we had not filled for a number of years, so we just took them out. In addition to that, there's 2 other vacant positions which we're not ready to delete yet, but they are not funded, and so that accounts for the $143,000 reduction in salaries and benefits. Under salaries and benefits, this is a big number, but this also includes the youth wages, about $700,000 of youth wages under the hourly sub-line item. Under M&O, this includes for the most of this is for the Verdugo Job Center operating costs and the rent, so that's why that's a big number. Direct assistance is the money that is used, that is allocated for the training costs for the participants. So we are proposing significantly more training that we would pay for on behalf of participants and job seekers. So that's the workforce budget. In terms of service levels, currently we have unprecedented activity for workforce. We have 25 job training projects ongoing right now, including 6 youth programs. We have 25 employment training vendors that we're working with on an ongoing basis, who are the ones that provide the individual training to our job seekers. We'll have 350 to 400 clients that will complete training before the year is out. We still see between 8,000 and 9,000 visits per month at the Job Center. And 480 youth will be enrolled in summer and year-round. And in 10-11, we expect more with increased funding for 10-11 for youth. In terms of challenges and future outlook, we are going to be challenged with compliance issues with regard to closing out the economic stimulus program and all of those requirements. Lower Schick, for example, is currently monitoring other WIBs and making significant findings, and so we have to prepare for that. Again, fluctuating funding for workforce. We could see a 50% reduction in 11-12, and future youth funding is questionable. They're thinking about cutting out youth funding altogether beginning next year, which leads to a challenge of having the ability to be able to ramp up and ramp down as funding levels fluctuate. And a new trend is to develop joint grant application partnerships. As you recall, we've been coming to you with small $150,000 to $200,000 grants. Most of those are partnerships that we've developed with other entities in order to jointly apply for additional funding to provide more programs. I think that's it.
Question, Mr. Quintero.
You mentioned significant findings with other WIBs. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the biggest challenges with economic stimulus has been expenditure rates. Apparently, the first WIBs that have been monitored have had very low expenditure rates. I've been assured by Don and our finance staff that our expenditure rate is pretty much on target. The other thing that they have found is spending more on administration than service delivery, which, again, I feel confident will not be the case here in Glendale. So it's been those kinds of things.
Okay. Then I have a question. The slide pertaining to Job Center, what's the current status on the lease there at the Job Center?
Yes, Chairman Quintero, we're currently locked into our current lease until February 2013. So 1 year in advance, we're going to have to make a decision and a commitment as to whether we're going to continue for another 5-year term or we're going to look to do something different. But we're currently in the middle of a 5-year extension.
So when did we sign the current lease? A year ago or 2 years ago?
We're in a holdover right now. So we executed our extension in February of '07.
February of '07 we extended. And what are we paying a month?
We're currently paying $1.67 a square foot.
What is that? Monthly check. How much is a monthly check we write to the...
We currently pay, the city pays $22,000 a month, and EDD pays, or the state pays $17,000. So together we pay $39,000 a month, which equals $468,000 a year. It's a 24,000 square foot standalone building with 150 surface grade parking spaces.
Does that include utilities or no?
No, utilities we pay directly to GWP.
Any idea how much that is a month?
I believe it's about $60,000 a year. Yeah, $60,000 a year in utilities.
60,000 a year in utilities. So the city portion is 22,000 a month, and EDD's portion is 17,000 a month.
So I think the point Chairman Quintero is trying to make is, have we looked at any other venues for locating that at the time our lease is going to come up? Is that the best use of the funds? Are there any city owned space that's available? You lower the overhead, that's more money we can put into the programs.
It's parking?
Yes, Mayor and Jared. We will certainly look at comps. We will certainly do an analysis. By law, we're not supposed to be paying more than the market rate, so we are obligated to look at comps. Yeah, what's difficult is finding that type of parking configuration. At one point, we thought about the potential of moving to the old police building. One of the obstacles that we had not been able to overcome before those plans were changed was what to do about the additional parking burden. But we will definitely do a cost analysis when we're ready.
I know it may sound a little crazy, but let's take a look at the bottom of the Civic Center, because it's not used very often, and you could easily, I don't know what specialized equipment is in that building now, but I've been there, and it seemed to me to be computers and desks. And I don't know how often we use that bottom floor, but I haven't seen it used in months and months and months.
Mr. Draymond,
How many square feet are we talking about?
24,000 you said we need?
It's what we currently have, and it's fully occupied. In fact, we could probably use more. Again, the problem is the fluctuation in the funding. 3 years ago, if you recall, at the time that we did have this discussion about potentially moving to the old police building, we were scaling back, and we were shrinking. And we didn't need the full 24,000 square feet. We probably needed half. So we were thinking of even subleasing our lease to other organizations. And then the economic recession hit, and we just blew up again, and so did the state. So now we're both busting at the seams again. So that's part of the challenge.
Mr. Starber.
Question, Jess, what was our original investment in the building? As I recall, we invested in the building when we originally signed the lease for the interior improvements and for rehab of the building.
All right, 1.6 in CDBG funds, 1.6 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it looks like you're talking a minimum of 400 to 500 parking spaces per day. 8,000 to 1,000 to 10,000 a month,
That's a lot.
an average of 400 or 500. Good luck finding a place that has that additional capacity available.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't need that much parking, quite frankly. And another situation is, we're co-located with EDD, and there's different services that EDD is providing that don't necessarily have to be part of the job center either. So, look, all I know is that for years and years and years, we have been paying $22,000 a month plus utilities. That's just our portion, not EDD. And that's money that, could have been spent on training rather than paying the landlord's mortgage. So I absolutely think we should be looking around and getting creative and trying to find another location, because this is a stone loser. Because what happens also is when the funds are cut, then we wind up paying an even larger portion of our funds to the rent. We need to get out of there, period. I'm disappointed that we didn't get it into the police station there. That would have been an absolutely great location for it, with plenty of buses and so forth. Well, it didn't happen. We're locked into 2013, but we're still paying that same amount of money, and we're going to pay it all the way into 2013. So I hope we find something else.
Have we thought about co-locating at the community college? Is there any benefits to that? I don't even know if they have space, but they've got parking, and certainly you've got a pool of vocational trainees who are learning their skills there. It may create some synergy. But anyway, this is something we're throwing out, and I think clearly there's strong interest in reducing overhead and putting more money into the programmatic needs of the WIB. Ms. Friedman.
I have a question about the redevelopment set-aside. Has that number gone down to reflect the takeaway from the state? In other words, they can't expect us to put aside the same amount of money while they're taking the same funds.
They actually do. In fact, the housing set-aside isn't impacted by the takeaway,
Why not?
because it comes out of the 80%, doesn't it?
They calculate the take on your total increment, and then they take out the 20%, and you're supposed to pay for it with
Out
the
of your
80%.
80%.
That's why then they made the provision, if your 80% can't afford it, you could borrow from the housing, but then you have to pay it back.
If you don't have the 80% to make the payment, you can borrow against your housing set-aside funds to make the payment, but it has to be repaid.
Are we sure that is that legal for them to do it that
Well,
way?
we don't
Is there
think
any
their
way
we
can-
don't think their take is legal anyway at all.
So what about, why not just say, you've reduced our budget by whatever percent that came to, and we're reducing our housing set aside by the same percent?
Well, because if their legislation is legal, which so far it is,
They win.
unless the CRA prevails on appeal, then the statute stands. And I will note that this is the way the takeaway has been done since they first took money from redevelopment agencies. The housing advocates are very effective. And so when these programs come up, in order to not get the housing advocates against these plans, they always preserve the affordable housing component, which is the 20%. And they've done that again. It's very consistent with what happened back in 2006, I think was the last 2006 the last takeaway. I forget how long ago it's been. But it's very consistent with the past practices and the way they formulated the legislation. So if the legislation that took the funds doesn't stand, then we'll get our money back, maybe. But if it does, then they prescribed it in a way that preserves the housing set-aside.
Finally, I guess my final question, Mr. Duran, is we, as council frequently, and as the authority frequently take trips to Washington, and I know we have gone through our federal priority list and all that, but is there anything we can do when we go to Washington to get some additional funds, either through earmarks or through competitive programs that we can do? And you may not know that now, but please have a little scorecard ready for us when we do go, because many of us, we're probably there 5-6 times a year, not individually, but collectively, if not more. Just so if we get a chance, we could bend the ear of the appropriate committee member or appropriations member or executive agency staffer.
Okay. Keep that in mind.
Especially in Section 8. I mean, that's a biggie. The whole homeless issue at the Hearth, as you said, is a new program, and if there's any opportunities that arise, I think that'd be good for us to know. Okay, any other questions? Okay, this requires a motion. It does not.
Presentation, but Mr. Mayor and members of the Housing Authority, second item on this agenda is Director of Community Services and Parks regarding 5-year 2010-2015 consolidated plan for addressing community development, homeless housing, and economic development needs in the city of Glendale. At 2A is a city council motion approving a 5-year consolidated plan and authorizing submission to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. And at 2B is a Housing Authority motion approving a 5-year consolidated plan and authorizing submission to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Okay, Mr. Duran.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Chairman Quintero, members of the Housing Authority. As we've mentioned several times over the last couple of years, or any time that we present to you our CDBG annual plan, in order to be eligible to continue to receive our HUD funds, whether it's housing, community development, or homeless, we do need to have on file with HUD a 5-year strategic plan, which is called the consolidated plan. Our current consolidated plan expires in June, on June 30th, for the term 2005 to 2010. So we prepared a new 2010 to 2015 consolidated plan. We attach with your report an executive summary and a table of contents. We spared you from copies of the entire report. As you can see from the table of contents, it is a 180-page planning document, plus 44 HUD-required tables, plus 6 maps, and plus 4 appendixes. So all told, it's about a 350-page planning document that we have to submit to HUD. So I will provide you with just the gist of what the plan is. And what the plan is, when you incorporate all of the community development, housing, homeless, and employment training initiatives in the city of Glendale into one consolidated plan or holistic strategy, is a $215 million spending plan, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not necessarily a lot of money. But it does represent $19 million more than our 5-year consolidated plan of 5 years ago. For the most part, absent any budget forecasting from HUD or from DOL, basically what we've done is we've taken the current year and the current year trends and extrapolated our current strategies over the next 5 years to develop the 5-year funding levels and the 5-year program strategies and priorities. As we've reported before, the development of the plan has also involved extensive community input. We did receive direct input from over 1,300 residents in the city of Glendale in validating our program priorities and program strategies. A major portion of the consolidated plan relates to housing, so we've worked closely with the housing staff and with the community planning department to ensure that our plan is consistent with the housing element of the city of Glendale. So we do have housing staff here to answer any questions you might have related to the housing program strategies. But again, the crux of what we need the council and the authority to review and approve are the projected 5-year funding allocations and the 5-year program strategies. We've prepared a slide presentation, and Mr. Carrillo is prepared to walk you through our recommendations to provide you more details if you'd like.
How about a trot, perhaps?
Trot. Mr. Carrillo, could you do a trot? Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the City Council and Housing Authority, and Mr. Starbird. I'm going to jump a little ahead because Jess gave an introduction of the consolidated plan and saves me some time here. But the crux of it is the funding levels that we discussed earlier in Jess's presentation times 5. In other words, it's a 5-year projection estimate of the consolidated plan funds. And the main funds are the CDBG, the ESG, and the home funds. Again, CDBG being about $3.6 million times 5, the ESG and the home again times 5. And this is just the entitlement funding that we're receiving for the consolidated plan. The second source of funding we're using is the some at federal, some at state funding, and of course the set-aside fund, which is certainly, we're not sure as far as the funding levels for the next 5 years for that. But again, it's the additional funding that's required to be inserted in the consolidated plan as far as the overall strategy for the programs that we're going to operate for the next 5 years. Again, Mr. Duran mentioned it's about $250 million, which says a lot, but again, over the 5 years, it doesn't meet all of our needs for the city. One of the requirements is that extensive citizen participation plan, and without going into too much details, we do look at the demographics, the needs surveys that were done in the fall, our community meetings, our focus group with youth, and also the homeless continuum of care agencies, and of course several public hearings. And all in all, it's about 1,300 residents who are involved, whether the surveys or face-to-face, in developing the priorities and the needs of the consolidated plan. I wanted to bring up this map because it kind of shows some demographic information of where we were back in 1990 as far as the low and moderate income population that CDBG and a lot of our federal programs targeted. You'll see the striped lines were census tracts that were over 50% low and moderate income. The darker shade are now the 2000 census tracts that are eligible for CDBG. With the 2010 census, we're beginning to look at possible trends of a change in the demographics of the city and possibly concentrating even more census tracts in the interior parts of the city. So, I mean, it remains to be seen. Some of these tracts are very close to 50% on the western Glendale side, while as the interior ones are growing in low-mod populations. So something we'll see in a couple of years, and I can't really estimate, but my best bet is we'll have more concentrations, which again have impacts on the
Mr.
block
Draymond.
grant.
Hi. Quick question. I just want to make sure I understand. The striped tracks were the 2000, did you say? I mean, 1990, excuse me.
Yes, Mr. Dever, 1990, and also the gray ones.
So in other words, the gray and the stripe together were 1990. Now we're looking at just the gray area as of 2000.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Thank you. That
So,
was-
well, I mean, what does that imply, by the way, for the areas that are striped then?
Well, those areas are no longer eligible for some of the public works funding that CDBG has. It's only allowed in those certain areas that are
They no
gray.
longer are in that
Right.
criteria.
Right. And then next, again, census will know more about where the other areas are going to be
Thank you.
not eligible.
So the income went up in those areas.
Yes, and that's good news. The income did go through it in one of the areas there, the way South Glendale, which I believe is Victory, really made a increase in income. And again, it's the more home ownership. So it's been, it's good news on that side, and we'll continue to work our programs around the areas that are really in need. So one way we do look at it is good news. I want to just give a brief overview of just the strategies that are part of the consolidated plan, and this is the CDBG funding out of the out of the 18 million. Again, 15% can be used for social services, and by and large, this is I would say very similar to the strategy we had 5 years ago. However, we do look at senior services as increasing need, and that may even increase as we have the population age and require more services, and as far as entitlement funding from other sources, Social Security begin to reduce the seniors' income. But by and large, youth continue to be the priority. We do have crime and public safety, which continues to be our star, and our PAL police programs that really address the at-risk youth programs. And employment training is at $100,000 because a lot of it's leveraged by the WIA funds, and they provide the source of funding for job training and job development. So CDBG plays a smaller part as far as support services for ESL, adult training, any other kind of services where the WIA funds are not eligible. The neighborhood capital improvements are the largest of the CDBG strategies. And again, $10,800,000 is for a number of activities for the capital improvements. And for example, the target improvements are mainly for our public works programs that are targeted in neighborhoods. Right now, for example, East Garfield is one of our CDBG target areas. So they're leaning towards other areas, whether it's Western Glendale or down South Glendale Avenue, to do some more targeted improvements. With that is also ADA improvements, curb ramps, sidewalks, and bikeways and bike paths that we want to certainly include the next 5 years. The code enforcement, obviously, we know that's an important part, and that's also with the Housing Authority, the set-aside funds, the important part of our overall strategy to continue to keep the housing stock in place. Community centers is really more nonprofit oriented. We certainly want to keep our nonprofit agencies have accessibility to the block grant funds for their improvements of their community centers, which are certainly aging and require improvements. By and large, the largest piece is the parks, the library, and the homeless center. Parks being the main strategy there as far as the park expansion projects and other park improvement projects here in the eligible target areas. We do have funds set aside for ADA facility improvements, and also we have 3 years of remaining Section 108. They want to say the ADA would also come in the other areas as far as curb ramps or any facility improvements. So it's not necessarily just the $100,000, but it is included in other categories, whether we do ramps or facility improvements. Okay. The economic development strategy is largely coordinated with the Community Redevelopment and Housing Department, with WIA as well. Largely, it's the commercial rehab program that's being studied for South Glendale. We have finished the Adams Square commercial area and the Colorado Street commercial area. And our next target area that we're looking at in discussing this with the redevelopment staff is possibly South Glendale Avenue, and looking at those storefronts and trying to come up with a comprehensive facade program. It's still in a very preliminary stage right now, but I think for the next 5 years, something we'll seriously look at with the council's direction. Job creation, employment, again, leveraging our funds with WIA funds would help certainly create the jobs that we need here in Glendale, especially for small businesses. We're looking at a business and technical assistance program that hopefully can help those small businesses with technical assistance for whether it's accounting services, marketing, expansion, looking at their expenses and keeping them here in Glendale, along with some leveraging from the WIA funds. The homeless needs and strategies, just talked about the multiple sources of these funds. Again, we're looking at the CDBG, ESG, the supportive housing program funds, the set-aside funds, and the current ARA homeless prevention and rapid rehousing funds for a number of programs for the coming 5 years. Largely, it starts off with our street outreach, being out in the community and looking and working with the chronic homeless, and then through the case management system, and then emergency and transitional housing, which by and large is transitional housing makes up the larger part of that area. It's about $2.4 million for transitional housing, the balance being for emergency housing. Homeless prevention, certainly an important part of the strategy, where we work with families prior for them, as they're having difficulties with paying rent or utilities, giving them some case management and homeless prevention assistance. Permanent supportive housing is our shelter plus care programs and our chronic lease for special needs, and that certainly continues to be a growing need as well. The housing needs, again, by and large, are multiple sources and certainly handled by the community redevelopment housing staff, but as far as the consolidated plan, we have to address those issues in there and work with the staff to make sure we're coordinating our activities together. But again, multiple sources, the home fund, the set-aside funds, state funds, and other funding that becomes available are utilized for the housing needs. Again, affordable housing for ownership and home buyer is really important, and we emphasize the need for those home ownership opportunities for lower income persons. New construction, again, just like Vassar City Lights, that's an important part of our strategy, and of course maintaining and preserving the housing stock for our families here in Glendale, certainly a big part of our program. Mr. Duran talked about certain issues, and I won't go back into, but for a consolidated plan, they seem to reflect the diminished resources for services and the infrastructure needs of the city. The economy certainly has played a big part in our nonprofit service delivery, where they're cutting back. They're trying not to cut back, but certainly staffing for nonprofits and community agencies has been reduced. Services have been reduced. I talked about the census, where we'll be in 2 years from now with that data, where that changes neighborhoods that are qualified for CDBG or changes the overall population in Glendale. Prioritizing need, again, with the CDBG and the other programs, it's very flexible in identifying the needs of the community and then coming back with certain strategies to change the consolidated plan. And again, the increased HUD and state regulatory requirements and the scrutiny for HUD and the other programs, and of course the consolidation of the homeless programs are certainly some of the 5-year challenges we're going to look at for the consolidated plan. So in essence, that's pretty much the plan. It is a working document. We are working on our draft and finalizing that, certainly with comments from the public or staff. We would have that into HUD in June and begin our new cycle of the 5-year consolidated plan.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions from council or those sitting as the authority? So these motions are essentially identical, just
separate.
One for council, one for authority. I would love to entertain a motion for council.
I'll move 2A.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes.
For the housing, I'll move to B.
Second.
Roll call.
Authority members Draymond,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
C.
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Brazilian, Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes.
Is there a motion to adjourn
For the council? Yes.
Motion to adjourn for the Housing Authority.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Council's adjourned. Authorities adjourned.